Welcome to Coffee with Kish. So, today on Coffee with Kish, I'm going to talk about definitions. The definition I'm using for the term Mormonism. How do I define Mormonism? This is an important discussion. I think it will help avoid some misunderstandings. I've gotten some feedback thus far where people have assumed that when I'm talking about Mormonism, I'm just talking about the LDS Church. And so when I say Mormonism, they think, oh, he's talking about the LDS Church. And while there is some truth to the association between Mormonism and the LDS Church, a very strong correlation between the two, I'm using the term Mormonism in a very particular way. When I use the term Mormonism, I'm talking about all of those things that spring from Joseph Smith's religious career that starts in the 1820s in New York State, okay? So, in other words, I take for my subject, when I say Mormonism, that shorthand for everything that springs from Joseph Smith's career, including the stuff that he was doing in 1820, and maybe even a little bit before 1820. All right, so a lot of people, when they hear the word Mormonism, they're just hearing LDS Church. Because for the longest time, people in the LDS Church were called, and they still are called by many people, honestly, Mormons. And people, instead of talking about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is their approved terminology, they'll say the Mormon Church. And so when I use the term Mormonism, everybody understandably assumes that I'm talking about the LDS Church. But the truth of the matter is that Joseph Smith's career gave birth to a lot of different sects. Now, in the beginning, there was just one. There was the church that he founded in 1830, right? After he translated the Book of Mormon, which he received from an angel and translated by the gift and power of God miraculously. Okay, so, yeah, at the beginning there was one church. But as happens very often in Christian movements, and I do qualify or categorize Mormonism among the Christian movements. I know some people have a problem with that because at the very least they consider Mormonism to be heterodox, and that's fine with me. I'm not here to argue that point. But as often happens with churches, they fragment, they splinter, they generate different groups, and that's no different in this case. There is the LDS Church, which is the largest branch of Mormonism, and then there are other churches that spring off from that movement. Now, it's at this point, at this juncture, that I need to say something else. I'm using the term Mormonism because it's very familiar. There are other churches that have sprung off from Joseph Smith's original church who do not like the term Mormon. I'm thinking specifically of the Community of Christ, which is the former reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that essentially consists of those followers of Joseph Smith's movement who stayed in the Midwest when Brigham Young led the Utah pioneers out to the west, out to the Salt Lake Valley, where they settled and where my ancestors lived. So the Midwestern Latter-day Saints don't like the term Mormon. And so I'm afraid that I will be using that term, and here's the reason why. I have a reason why. I'm not trying to offend in saying this, because I'm talking about Mormonism as a cultural force. I'm not talking about it as a point of personal or individual sect identity. The reason why I use it is because the other popular term that's often used is the Restoration. Or Restorationism. But this is the complicating factor that I wanted to deal with all the time, and that is that there are many forms of Restorationism. Perhaps the most successful, aside from the Latter-day Saint Church and the Smith movement of Restorationists, is the Stone Campbell or Campbellite movement, and its very successful sect, the Disciples of Christ. Okay, that's another Restoration movement, and so I don't want to muddy the waters by confusing the Campbellite movement, the Stone Campbell movement, with the Smith Cowdery or Smith Rigden movement of Restorationism. Now, there is an interesting connection between the two, and that is that Alexander Campbell, one of the leading lights of the Campbellite movement, who followed in the footsteps of his father Thomas Campbell, he had a follower named Sidney Rigden, who became Joseph Smith's follower and contributed a lot to the early ideas and shape of Smith Restorationism. So sometimes I almost think of it as Smith Rigden Restorationism. He was there for some of the great visions. He was there through some of the translation projects. After Joseph Smith died, he tried to become the caretaker of the church, or the successor of Joseph Smith in a sense. I'm talking about Sidney Rigden. But Brigham Young won the day, won the argument, and a large body of the saints, the followers of Joseph Smith's movement, went out west with Brigham Young. Rigden actually didn't join the reorganized church that stayed behind. He tried to start his own church. It lasted for a little while, but was never very successful. But he came out of the Campbellite movement. So there is a connection between the Smith Restorationists and the Stone Campbell movement of Restorationists, but they're distinct movements. And I choose to call what I'm talking about here Mormonism. It's a term that everybody knows, right? Well, a lot of people know. It has the biggest name recognition out there of all the terms that could be used. But I understand that some people who I put underneath that larger umbrella for my purposes won't want to be called Mormons, and I'm happy not calling them Mormons. I'm not saying that everybody whose church springs from Joseph Smith's religious career, or prophethood, if you prefer, not everyone who springs from that needs to call themselves a Mormon. I'm not insisting on calling them Mormons, but I'm going to call everything that springs from Joseph Smith's religious career Mormonism. And the LDS Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is one facet of that. Certainly, it's the most iconic, the most successful, the largest. There are more LDS Mormons. Now, they don't like that term either, because recently the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, President Russell M. Nelson, their prophet, seer, and revelator, called the word Mormon essentially satanic. In other words, he didn't use those words. He said that Satan rejoices when he hears the word Mormon. Personally, I don't agree with that, but again, I'm not going to apply the name Mormons to people in the LDS Church when they don't want to be called Mormons, except sometimes out of convenience or when I forget that I shouldn't say that. But I will try very hard to use the term Latter-day Saints to refer to those people alive today who still follow President Russell M. Nelson as their prophet. Anybody before that, or if I talk about people before Russell M. Nelson said that, I will use the term Mormons, because I'm not affiliated with the LDS Church, and I don't really think that I have to observe President Nelson's dictates on that for things that happened before he made that pronouncement. I'm just not going to do it. So as for myself, I call myself a Mormon. And now, here you go. This is why I call myself a Mormon. Because frankly speaking, I wouldn't exist. I would not exist. The DNA combinations that came together and made me who I am today, yeah, love me or hate me, all that stuff came together because of Joseph Smith. That's kind of frightening to think, I suppose, for some of you, but it's true. Because my ancestors all joined Mormonism before the railroad went through Utah. All right, so they were all pioneers. They all came out west. They started joining Smith's movement back in the mid-1830s. And some of them joined in Europe in the first missions, the first European missions. But those people in Europe, they all sailed to the United States, landed here, many of them in New Orleans, and then made their way out west with the wagon trains and hand carts, etc., etc., etc. So I'm here because of that. So I call myself a Mormon, and I will continue to do so, and this is my channel on Mormonism. Okay, so now that we've gotten that out of the way, I hope you have some better context for why I've used these terms, and I hope that we can avoid as much as possible from here on out assuming that I am saying Mormonism equals Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Well, as in the Catholic idea, there's this sort of link to the past. For Catholics, it's that chain, the Catholic Church being around and having popes that trace their authority back to Peter. For Mormonism, there's an interruption. There's an apostasy, as it were. There's a disappearance of priesthood authority, and it takes Joseph Smith's career to get it started again. And that's the priesthood, and that's fundamental, I think, to the culture of Mormonism, that there is that authority. Now, it of course can be the case, and I don't know every splinter group that comes off of the Smith Restoration movement or Mormonism. Maybe some have abandoned that, and I think it's probably, yes, exactly the case that that's true. But when we think about the whole and the many groups that still think that authority is important, then I think it is a characteristic that's very much predominant in Mormon culture, in the phenomenon of Mormonism. Anyhow, so that's me today. It's Coffee with Kish. Please understand again, when I talk about Mormonism, it's not necessarily the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's not necessarily the Latter-day Saints. I could be talking about anything connected to the religious career, the prophetic career of Joseph Smith and what sprang from that. So this is Coffee with Kish. Please like and subscribe. Please share your thoughts below in the comments, and I'll try to get to everyone. I may not be able to get to everyone, or sometimes silence is golden on my part with comments, or I just don't have time to answer everyone. But Coffee with Kish, thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.